What's going on, everybody? Top 10 Pokemon back. Thank you for joining me for this Pokemon card auctions of the week recap. We may have hit a ceiling for some of these high-end modern Pokemon card grails like the Umbreon VMAX and the Pikachu Van Gogh promo, at least a temporary ceiling for this week. However, we also saw some new record prices for certain modern cards, so there's give and take this week, folks. Thank you so much for tuning in. You're not going to want to miss today's episode. Before we get into today's recap, a quick shout out to today's auction recap sponsor. It is lowpopping.com, your source for investment-worthy Pokemon cards. If you are in the market for high-end graded Pokemon cards, you need to go check out lowpopping.com, where they have assembled a monstrous selection of PSA, CGC, and BGS graded cards, including vintage and modern grails. Or perhaps you're an investor of high-end sealed product. Well, you won't find any shortage of that here either, folks. And as always, you can trade for or make offers on just about anything you see. And don't forget to take advantage of their buy now, pay later options. And remember, they also offer worldwide shipping. Buy your cards from a legitimate and trustworthy seller. Support the channel by going over to lowpopping.com. After the recap, of course. Go check out what they have. I'll put a link to their website in the description of this video. Alright folks, let's start off this recap with some evolutions from Prismatic Evolutions. Here is a special illustration rare EVEX that sold as a raw copy for $248. Here is the Flareon EX special illustration rare that sold for $220. And then here is the Espeon EX that sold for $395. And then here we have the Big Hoss himself, the Umbreon EX that sold for $1,525 big ones. And then here, folks, is a God pack of all of the special illustration rare evolutions plus the EV Reverse Holo Master Ball card that sold for a total of $4,650 for 10 cards. That's pretty crazy, folks. Speaking of crazy, how about this Mew EX from Paldean Fates has been hitting some crazy prices this week in auction. Here's a PSA 10 that sold for an even $1,000. Another one that sold for $1,020. Another one that sold for $1,126 for this Bubble Mew EX. Here we have a Charizard EX from the 151 set, also hitting some four-figure prices. Here's a PSA 10 copy that sold for $965. Another one that sold for $1,050. So yeah, these two cards right here are on fire this week. Here we have a Tag 10 Greninja EX from Twilight Masquerade that sold for $822. Here is a BGS 10 Giratina V from Lost Origin that sold for $1,987. And then here is the Latios Alt Art GX card from Team Up that sold as a PSA 10 for the new record price of $5,000 this week. This card continues to secure itself as the king of the alt arts with a price like that. Am I right? On to the Umbreon VMAX, which has actually kind of cooled off this past week, folks. We were seeing this card go for over $3,000 last week. This week, we saw a couple of sales as PSA 10s. Here's one for $2,751. Another one for $2,700. So, still an amazing price for this card, but I think we finally hit some kind of a ceiling as a PSA 10 for this card, as it came down just a little bit this week. And then we saw the Pikachu Van Gogh promo in PSA 10, also doing very well, but not hitting any new record heights this week. Here's a PSA 10 that sold for $810. Here's another one that sold for $720. And then we saw the CGC 10 pristine copy of this card sell for $1,005. So, this card really hasn't lost any value this week, but it really hasn't gained any either. But, I mean, this card's been gaining for the past several weeks, so, like I said, for the Umbreon and the Pikachu Van Gogh promo, we are actually at a standstill for the first time in what seems like months. Speaking of Pikachu, here's a 25th anniversary Japanese birthday Pikachu signed by Himino and sold for $2,075. Just a couple of cards from the XY era. There weren't a whole lot that came through. Here is the Full Art Giratina EX from Ancient Origins that sold for $335, along with this Mega Gyarados EX from Breakpoint that sold as a PSA 10 for $360. A couple pieces of sealed product. Here we have 4 Evolving Skies booster boxes that sold for $4,494, so that's well over $1,000 a box. Here is a first edition Fossil booster box that sold for $12,721, and I mean that it may have went for a little bit more. I don't know. It has like some residue on the front there, which may have taken away from the value a little bit. Maybe it didn't. I don't know. Here we have a Charizard Funko Pop, graded a PSA 10, sold for $257. And you probably can't tell, because I think he's actually pretty far up there, but I have a Charizard Funko Pop just like this one up on my wall there. And I have no intention on grading it. But that's just me. I feel like Funko Pops are not something that you grade, but to each their own. This will probably be the one and only time I cover a graded Funko Pop on these recaps, so there you go. On to the vintage portion of the video. Let's start off with some fire with this BGS 10 Black Label Ancient Mew that sold for $9,900 this week. Here we saw 2 of these beta playtest cards. We've been seeing these on the alt platform more recently, but we saw a couple come through on eBay. Here is a CGC-10 Scyther beta playtest card that sold for $4,555, along with this CGC-10 Blastoise beta playtest card that sold for $10,100. Here we have a Tag 10 First Edition Dark Charizard from Team Rocket that sold for $3,226. Here is a First Edition Shining Charizard from Neo Destiny in PSA 10 that sold for $11,400. Here is a PSA 9 Double Hollow Arrow Shining Gyarados that sold for $1,813. Here is a PSA 9 Crystal Lugia that sold for $3,350. Here is a BGS 9.5 Gengar from Skyridge that sold for $3,854. Here is a PSA 9 Reverse Hollow Gengar from Legendary Collection, sold for $2,600. And then we saw this Tag 10 Sabrina's Gengar First Edition Hollow from Gym Heroes that sold for $3,904. Here is a PSA 9 Gold Star Mewtwo that sold for $3,055. A PSA 10 Blastoise EX from Fire Red Leaf Green that sold for $1,505. On to the Fanatics Collect weekly and monthly auction block. We saw a couple of these Japanese Umbreon EXs. Here is a copy that sold for $1,230. Another one that sold for $1,290. Another one that sold for $1,350. Here we have a CGC-10 Alakazam from Skyridge that sold for $1,290, a PSA 10 Regice Gold Star that sold for $4,080, a Celebi Gold Star that sold for $3,600, and the Alakazam Gold Star, also in PSA 10, that sold for $5,400. Here is a Hollow Lugia from Secret Wonders that sold for $3,240. A First Edition Red Cheeks Pikachu from base set in PSA 10 that sold for $4,200. A CGC-10 Reverse Hollow Charizard from Legendary Collection sold for $6,900. And then here is a PSA 10 Japanese Gold Star Flareon 30,000 point promo card that sold for an even $9,000 this week. Here is a PSA 10 Japanese XY promo special case Team Rocket card that sold for $9,900. And then just a couple of interesting sales from the alt auction block this week. Here's a CGC-10 Pristine Hollow Charizard from EX Dragon that sold for $5,378. Here is a CGC-10 Unlimited Shining Charizard sold for $6,300. Here's a CGC-10 Metagross Gold Star that sold for $8,641. And then we're going to go back to Fanatics Collect for the monthly auction block in the auction of the week, which would be this PSA 10 Shadowless base set Charizard that sold for an even $60,000 this week. So the market is still extremely healthy, to say the least. Let me know what you thought of these auctions in the comments below. Don't forget to go check out lowpopping.com. I would really appreciate it. That's all I got today, folks. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll catch you in my next one.